Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My dear brothers and sisters in Islam, welcome to a new episode of our program, The Pool of Ideas, exclusively right here on Huda TV with Dr. Mahmoud Khalifa. In this episode, inshallah, my dear brothers and sisters, we will begin talking about the concept of feminism, a concept that has become so widespread in the world that we live in today. It has become prevalent in the West and also in the Muslim world. We want to talk about it, critique it, see where it stands and what its pitfalls are. Also, maybe what are some of the ideas in it that, inshallah, Islam can counter. And at the same time, inshallah, we will see through our discussion that anything good that we can say we can find in feminism has already been in Islam more than 1400 years ago. And we'll also talk a little bit about the extremism that feminism has fallen into, inshallah. Let me welcome my guest, Dr. Mahmoud Khalifa. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us.
Thank you for having me.
Feminism obviously comes from the idea of female, feminine, but from an ideological perspective, what is feminism?
Feminism is basically, as an idea or as an ideology, is an ideology which basically defends, champions women's rights. Women's rights to vote, to economic and financial independence, women's right to equal pay, women's rights to sexual relationships, and so on. That is basically in a Western context. So feminism is basically a phenomena, a modern phenomena in the West. But we can, of course, talk about Islamic feminism, or we'll talk about that later on. Islamic feminism started with the rise of Islam, because Islam has given back to women their rights, their economic independence, their financial independence, and their individuality. Because women were not considered individuals, they were considered war booty, they were considered part of their family, they were basically more or less not independent human beings.
Why is it that feminists make this distinction? Why don't they just talk about human rights in general? Why are they specifically referring to the rights of women or the rights of female? Is it because historically women were oppressed in societies when compared to men?
Women were basically oppressed in Western societies. They did not have the rights. I mean, they were not allowed to have financial independence until like late 19th century. So women were they were not allowed to vote. They were not allowed to do many things. Even in Christianity, there were things like there was disagreement as to whether women have spirits or not. So men, or even the Bible, there is a blame laid on Eve as the instigator of the fall of Adam from paradise. So all the bad stereotypes issuing from the Bible, misconception of the Bible's misconception of women, and all the patriarchal societies that ruled over women and oppressed them. So the atmosphere in the West was an atmosphere that oppressed women. And as such, there was a need for that movement to come to life.
Let's talk a little bit about the history of feminism. When did it start as a concept in the modern world, and who are some of its main thinkers?
In the late 1960s, feminism started as a movement, but later, before that, the idea was all around the place, with people like Virginia Woolf trying to say that women should be given a place in universities, should be given a place in their houses, an independent room where they can pursue their writing or their habits, or have some independence from the men. So basically, Virginia Woolf is a forerunner of feminism in the Western world. So, and the word feminism did not come to denote what we know now as championing women's rights until 1960 in England.
Today in the world that we live in, we see that feminism has taken really a turn or a shift from its main principles, which are excellent. What has modern feminism been teaching that is wrong?
Modern feminism has failed to look at the differences in cultures. In the West, Western feminism is the outcome of a specific, like any other ideology, it has come out of a specific context. So you cannot impose the ideas or achievements of Western feminism and its understanding of what women's rights are. We cannot impose this on the Muslim world, for example. The feminism has happened or taken place in a context where there is a sexual liberty with the sexual revolution of 1960, for example. So that sexual revolution did not happen elsewhere in the Islamic world, for example. So the extremes to which feminism drove these rights, from the basic right to have a relationship to engaging in anomaly in gay and lesbian activities, these things are not really considered as normal rights in other countries, in other civilizations and cultures. So the feminist concept of sexual freedom doesn't apply elsewhere because it has appeared in a context where free love was on the rise, sexual relationships, the sex revolution of 1960. So to talk about that or say that feminism is a universal culture is not right, because feminism appeared in a specific context, and to try to impose its ideas on other cultures is to miserably fail to understand that cultures are different.
Has feminism been wrong from the start, or did it take a turn for the worse?
It wasn't wrong from the start insofar as it talked about things like women's right to financial independence, women's right to vote, and so on. But when it came to sexual freedoms, feminism has somehow failed its mission. It has driven things to extremes.
A little bit about feminism as it stands today. Where is it most active? Is it kind of a world phenomena now, or are there specific parts of the world where feminists they have a higher voice and influence than other parts of the world?
Like all Western ideologies, feminism was exported to other countries, packaged into with its Western culture and values, and sent to other cultures and other people. This feminism was popularized through the Hollywood. It was popularized through other means by, for example, getting female students from other cultures and allowing them to study in the West and inculcating certain feminist ideologies in their heads. So when they go back to their countries, they start talking the same ideas, or they start expanding, creating networks which disseminate these feminist ideologies from their Western point of view. And that's where the failure. They fail to see that cultures are different.
Excellent. Inshallah, my dear brothers and sisters, we need to understand here that when we're talking about feminism, well, obviously we're not attacking the rights of women in Islam or the rights of women in general. Actually, what our objective is to say that these ideologies exist, but the revelation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the sunnah of our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam came way back, a long time ago, to give women their full rights. So Dr. Khalifa, What can we say that is in feminism in the Western context that we as Muslims may find to be contradictory to our belief system?
Basically, feminism. There's an agreement with feminism in, as regards women's right to financial independence and so on. But feminism, when it comes to sexual relationships, lesbianism, and so on, is totally against Islam, our Islamic culture and belief system. So, feminism and Islam doesn't really need a feminism because it has already given women their rights 1,400 years ago. So feminism came as a result of a specific context in the West. So it has its own culture and it is value laden, and its values are different from the values of Islam as regards the sexual freedoms given to women, which is considered adultery in Islam.
Excellent. My final question in this segment is a question also relating to the definition of feminism. Can a male be a feminist, or is it only females who are feminists?
Feminism would require that you defend the rights of women and champion them. So basically, whether male or female, if you're defending women's rights according to the criteria of feminism in the West, you are a feminist.
When we come back, inshallah, I want to ask you if feminism is a type of reverse discrimination. We'll talk about that, my dear brothers and sisters, and much more about the principles of feminism when we come back from this short break, inshallah. So please stay with us. Assalamu alaikum and welcome back, my dear brothers and sisters. Before the break, I was asking Dr. Mahmoud Khalifa if feminism in itself is a form of reverse discrimination. Your thoughts?
Whatever comes as a reaction to a lack, feminism came as a reaction to the lack of women's rights. When something comes as a reaction, it can be taken to extremes. And feminism was taken to extremes of denying, of claiming equal rights with men, even on things which cannot be but complementary. And they did not acknowledge that a man and a woman relationship is complementary, and equality doesn't mean that that we should be equal in everything, or that feminism is just a defense of women's rights as against men's rights. So this is a reverse discrimination. It is by defending women's rights, they tend to step in a man's land and kind of limit the space of men as well. So taken to its extremes, feminism isn't a good idea insofar as it discriminates against men. So feminism should defend only the rights of women without having to make men as a target of ridicule and attack.
Excellent. Let's move into some of the main principles that make up the ideology of feminism. What are some of the basic tenets of feminism?
One of the basic tenets of feminism is that women were basically oppressed throughout history, and they should have their own rights come back, even at the expense of destroying the family. So women's rights doesn't consider a woman inside a family. It considers a woman outside family.
Basically as her own independent person, without making her part of the larger society and that nucleus of society, which is the family.
Yeah, it wants to treat women as individuals, complete individuals who are not part of any system. So they think that a family is a system that is a big failure and that it oppressed women by treating them as reproductive organs only, as just women as a means of reproducing human beings, but not as individuals who have rights. But by doing that, they're destroying the family as a unit that will always remain in human history, because without a family you don't have a good society.
That's one of the main tenets. What else?
That's basically, that's one tenet. The other tenet is that women will always stand on equal footing with men in all fields of life, even in some jobs which are too difficult for women to perform, which is an extreme way of looking at equality.
Can you give us some elaboration on that? How do they see that? Any
For
examples?
example, women may not be able to do certain things, jobs that require hard labor or that require, like fighting in armies and so on. War is a male reserve in most of its components, like 95%. So women cannot engage in all the fields of life. They have their own space, and men have their own space as well. And that doesn't make them unequal. I mean, women have their talents, certain talents that allows them to do whatever they can in their own fields. Men have the same things. So trying to put women on equal footing on all available jobs and all available fields is a wasting of their talents.
I want to take you back to the idea of family. Do feminists totally reject the idea of family, or do they see their own family structure? Do they see a different structure where, for example, it would be okay for a woman to work and for the men to be the stay-at-home father? Or do they totally reject the idea of family?
Yeah, they have, mostly the extreme feminism totally rejects the idea of family, basically because it looks at it as one way where men controlled females and used them as reproductive animals. That's a problem. But basically, there are a feminism which still looks at family as an important part of a female's or a woman's life.
As Muslims, do we agree with the general context of feminism, or are we totally at odds with the feminism that exists today?
We're totally at odds insofar as feminism is so libertine and it allows sexual liberalism. But basically, as regards other fields, we are okay. We're talking about financial independence, other privileges. These were given to women long before, and as such, we totally agree with that good, positive part of feminism.
You mentioned that feminism has its own ideas when it comes to the sexuality of females. What are these ideas, and have they taken extremes?
The idea of sexuality, I mean, they allow women to engage in relationships with women. And in Islam, that would be a complete problem and anomaly, because Islam creates certain standards for relationships. There are certain relationships which people can get into without getting into these extremes. So basically, feminism takes the sexual rights to extremes which would not be accepted by ordinary people, being Muslim and non-Muslim. So basically, it's an elite ideology as well, because those who engage in this are just a minority of worldwide society. So basically, feminism is already stepping into a terrain that is going to be very dangerous.
In the next episode, inshallah, we're going to talk in detail about Islam versus feminism. And we're going to compare and contrast. But you did mention a little bit earlier in this episode a term known as Islamic feminism. Is there such a thing? And if it does exist, is it a positive thing or is it a negative thing?
What is it? Islamic feminism?
Mm-hmm.
Islamic feminism is a response to Western feminism. So there was an attempt by some Muslim scholars, Muslim writers, to create our own version of Islamic feminism, which somehow tries to accommodate some of the ideas of feminism into our culture by not engaging, by not talking, for example, about the sexual freedoms engaged in by Western feminists. So basically, these feminists were trying to introduce feminism to the Islamic world. And the Islamic world suffers from a problem. Idealistically, from an ideal point of view, Islam has given women lots of rights. But in practice, people have trampled on many of these rights and have basically destroyed women's rights. So, and as such, there was a need for Islamic feminism, which revives feminism from an Islamic perspective. And as such, the need is very important for a reform, because we have forgotten the ideals of our religion, and some of us are treating women in a very bad way. We should admit that, contrary to what the Prophet did with his family,
Yes.
and contrary to the great times of Islamic civilization. So feminism, Islamic feminism is much needed from an Islamic perspective, not from a non-Islamic perspective.
Excellent. It looks like this is all that we have in this episode, inshallah. But before we end, if you can talk a little bit about the main problems or the main pitfalls of feminism in the way that they are practiced in the world today, in just a couple of minutes, inshallah.
Feminism has its downside because it is developing into separating the two genders and destroying the family. So we have the treating man as an independent gender, women as an independent gender. The idea that there could be a relationship between a woman and a woman, a family made up of two women, is an anomaly, is something that is very new and very destructive of the structure of the ordinary family, because the ordinary family is based on reproduction. So with a female, a two women relationship, you're not going to have a family, a normal family, and that's destructive of society, and that's very dangerous.
Mm-hmm. Doctor, thank you so much for being with us in this episode. Inshallah, the next episode, and I'm really looking forward to it, we will compare and contrast Islam versus feminism in detail, inshallah. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
My dear brothers and sisters, thank you so much for having been with us in this very special episode of the Pool of Ideas. We have talked a little bit about the history of feminism, what feminism is, especially in the West, what some of its pitfalls are, and also some of its main principles. In the next episode, inshallah, we'll talk more in detail about Islam versus feminism, and we will compare and contrast in depth, inshallah. Until then, take care of yourselves. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.